So tonight we are theoretically going to come to a conclusion of the 7-point mind training. We just have 4 more sub-points. You lived through the whole thing, didn't you? So far. Yeah. It's something like 35 sessions. And so I know we all know them well. And the last 4 we'll wrap up. And it's a nice wrapping up point. Next week I'm going to be gone with Laura, and Aaron will be in retreat. And so we'll have wonderful teaching by Jetsuma Tenzin-Pomo, a video teaching from her. We have extended an invitation for her to be here. She's accepted to come here in July, so that's a really precious gift. So it'd be nice to have a real wonderful teaching from her next week, and then I'll be back. And then after that, possibly Venerable Sompton. So good stuff going on. And we are at the last 4 of the 20 practices of the 7th point. Now this one, the title, Free Yourself by Means of Investigation and Analysis. And this is a tricky point, because this is not, as some would say, not for the wusses. This point is to identify your biggest affliction and take it head on, which is something to be really thoughtful of. What is our biggest mental affliction? What's the biggest problem? What is the biggest thing to attend to? What is the biggest source of my suffering? And go head on to it. What is the thing that's blocking me, the biggest problem right now? So this is where we have the opportunity to be like a warrior and say, well, let's do this and address it. Note of caution. It does not mean that if I am an alcoholic to drink a bunch of alcohol and take it on. Nor does it mean hang out in bars and see how much willpower I have. It means to address the mentally afflicted state. So to really start to recognize, where is the source of that tension? Where is the source of that impulse, that desire? Why does it keep arising? What's that source? And then to address that. So I'll just stick with alcohol because it's a pretty easy, obvious one. If alcohol is my problem, then being drunk is probably a big problem. It's going to be hard to have any clarity. It's going to be hard to have any real consistency in my practice. It's going to be hard to make any progress on a path if I'm drunk all the time. So that'd be a pretty, okay, let's deal with that first. So in this way, you can see where addressing the biggest barriers first is going to be really helpful in my practice. And so all of us have different triggers. But if we start paying attention, we're going to start to notice some patterns there. And might be a sense of real insecurity or fear that might be arising a lot, depending on the situation. So here it's noted to be mindful of the triggers, the things that come up a lot, the things that create resistance, the things that lead me astray from a balanced state of mind. Because the definition of mental affliction here within Buddhism is anything that draws me away from a balanced state of mind. So what's taking me away? So we start noticing, and we're going to notice there's some big ones usually pretty fast. And so here it says, let's address those first, because that's going to allow us to make more progress. So we want to notice them, and then we want to, by means of analysis and investigation, start to see what's the source of that. So we have a meditation when we do the 4 opponent powers where we'll bring to mind a situation that I acted in a way that was harmful. I have intelligent regret. And one of the things that we do in that meditation is to ask, what gave rise to this moment? Was it my fear? Was it my insecurity? Where did anger come from? What was I afraid of? What was I grasping at? And to start noticing that. So in this way it says, let's confront it. Let's deal with that first. And it also says, if it's too big of an affliction, withdraw. So, we could be like a warrior, but smart warriors know when to withdraw and say, let's not be overwhelmed by it. Don't put myself in situations, So, just a simple analogy. I've never been, but there's a group called Toastmasters. And they basically teach people how to speak publicly, because a lot of people have fear of speaking publicly. And so, they basically get up in front of people and they learn how to speak. They give toasts and they give talks. And so they're addressing a fear. So it's similar to that when I have certain afflictions, part of it is simply becoming willing to be uncomfortable, to do it anyway, to show up and notice, that is just a mental state. And it'll come and it will go. And I'm still here. So we learn to sort of lean into those states of discomfort. So a real valuable tool and a nice starting point for really creating some space for ourselves. Number 17. Pretty straightforward, but it's an interestingly subtle. It says, don't be boastful. Don't be boastful. So everything about our practice is about non-self, right? It's about recognizing, the emptiness of me, the emptiness of phenomenon. The grasping onto me is what's creating all my suffering and problems. So everything's about eliminating that. Boasting is supporting John, and I want you to think of me in a certain way. And there's very subtle boastful ways that we engage in things. So sometimes it's just merely pointing out, yeah, that's right, I did all the dishes. I'm just informing my spouse, that they're done. You don't have to worry about them. Yeah, they're done. Don't worry about it. Well, what's my real motivation? I want to get a little credit checklist. I did the dishes. So that's a subtle, boastful thing where it's not, I'm not out bragging I'm a great guy, but I'm letting people, kind of letting you know what I've done. I'm letting you know about me. And so being aware of this idea of being boastful is that even in these very subtle ways, we can be letting people know, think of me in a certain way, and I'm like this, and I want you to know these qualities about me. When we go to tell a story, we'll mention, I went to school, or I accomplished this, or I did that. And so we're not necessarily that constantly bragging, but we're letting people know, here's what I would like you to think about me, and here's who I am, and what am I doing? I'm reifying who I am. I'm reifying who I am. And, of course, the best qualities. I'm not telling you all my mistakes. I'm just telling you how responsible I am. I'm not telling you all the times I'm irresponsible. I'm just telling you this. And so just to be really aware of that, and that's a really good practice to work on. So with, I know there's some newer people who haven't been through the text with us, but the point on these practices is to take one or two and just work with them. Don't try to do all 20 in a day, but just one. Like, let's try not to be boastful today. See what that's like. See how challenging that might be. And what if somebody actually thinks of you in a way less than you would like? Wow, there's going to be a little sense of self here, John. Well, you don't understand. And so what's that grasping and clinging? So don't be boastful. It has a much more subtle play with it. 18, let's see. Do not bind yourself with hatred. Now, that seems like just plain good advice, right? Do not bind yourself with hatred. But the specific text here, which is commentaries, is around don't retaliate. Don't retaliate, because somebody does something, I'm going to get back. I'm going to, because I'm carrying that, and I've got this string of hatred. I usually pull out my my very famous Emerson quote, that it's been scientifically proven that for every minute of anger that you have, every minute of anger you will lose 60 seconds of happiness. Time tested, proven, absolute. And it's funny because have anybody told you not to be angry? And you're like, don't tell me not to be angry. That'll piss me off. And don't even mess with my anger. It's valid. It's righteous anger, And there was a question I got, somebody asked me about justifiable anger. Justifiable anger. I thought, well, there's no such thing as justifiable anger. When I'm angry, who's feeling the pain? I am. So there's nothing you could do to me that would justify me harming myself. Right? There's nothing you could do to me that would justify me harming myself. Because that's nothing but discontent and harm. And out of anger, not only do I feel poorly, it's not pleasant, it's not very prone to reactivity in ways that I'm going to regret and harm others. And so if somebody does what people might call a justifiable thing that I could take issue with, well, you know what that could be? A justifiable compassion. A justifiable compassion, because when I see someone harming someone or doing something harmful, well, compassion is I don't want suffering. I don't want anyone to suffer. I don't want to suffer. I don't want others to suffer. So how about responding to harmful or malicious acts out of compassion instead of anger? It says, what can I do to eliminate the suffering? And now my motivation is very different. It's not hard anger, rage, narrow focus. It's broad, open, compassionate, and saying, hey, do I need to step in and stop someone physically? But stop them compassionately. Do I need to set a boundary and not allow someone to mistreat me out of compassion, not out of anger? Because that's a very compassionate thing to do. I'm compassionate in that I don't want them to contribute to their own unhealthy actions, nor do I want to feel pain or suffering. So coming from a place of compassion, there's justifiable compassion. Justifiable anger, no, there's really nothing that you're going to do that's going to justify me harming myself and others. It doesn't make sense. But we'll hang on to that anger and that hatred. People tell you, don't be angry. I deserve to be angry. You know what they did to me? They empowered me to be angry and harm myself and carry a resentment and nurture that and disrupt my own sense of well-being. So there's the point here that says that we don't want to hang on to that, but the other common thing is don't retaliate. It's one thing to take anger on myself. And by the way, anger arises. Anybody ever notice that? It happens. We can sit here and go, hey, I'm not going to be angry. I'm going to be, Mr. Happy today. And then, anger will arise. Well, and then people get frustrated, like, I shouldn't be angry. Well, I bet you there's a cause for the anger. So thinking I shouldn't be angry, that doesn't make much sense either. I bet there's a cause. You wouldn't be angry unless there wasn't a cause. So technically, yeah, you should be angry. Because there's a cause for it. Now I'm angry. Seeds have been planted. Now I'm angry. Well, then the point is, what do I do with it? Do I take it out on another? Do I retaliate? Or is commonly taught, what we're mostly taught to do is what? Take some breaths. Take a walk. Get out of the situation. Whatever you do, don't push send on the email now. Right? I had a friend of ours who did a retreat with us. He got fired just before the retreat because he pushed send on the email where he told his bosses exactly what he thought about them. And it was pretty funny because he said, I have this mentor, and, I ran that email. I was pretty satisfied with that email. I ran it by my mentor. He said, don't send that. He's like, well, I already did. Yeah. Go figure. I got fired. Turned out nice, though. By the end of the retreat, he got word that he was rehired because, other conditions arose. So, but, we can push send and feel pretty good about it, Yeah, I told them. And so the idea of retaliating. So anger arises. Yeah, it arises. I'm not a Buddha yet. Not fully enlightened. Still got a sense of John here. And I've got seeds of anger, and I've nurtured them for many years. And so, yeah, it's going to arise. So one thing to do is not beat myself up for getting angry, and rather give myself credit for not reacting to it. It arises. Well, it will come and go, and I am not my anger. I'm experiencing it. And in that way, there's actually a big separation from a karmic imprint from it. Because if I don't identify with the anger, I'm not also accumulating the karmic imprint of that anger. I'm just noticing it. Yeah, there's some anger there. And I'm observing it, but I'm not angry. I'm experiencing anger. Very different place, very different imprint on my mind. So that, that's a practice, obviously, because when an emotion arises, well, we're in it. I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm anxious, I'm whatever I am. So one of the things that's a really nice tool when I notice anger, when I notice sadness, when I notice even joy, is to have that little mental note, wow, I'm experiencing joy. And I'm experiencing some sadness, and I'm experiencing some anger. And that's all. I'm experiencing it. It's very ephemeral. Not going to last. Matter of fact, the psychological definition of any emotion is that it doesn't last long. Just that's a feature of it, which is different than a mood, because moods last longer. But an emotions won't last long. We tend to re-trigger them. There's 9 ways to trigger an emotion. So if I'm sad, you know what I tell everybody? I'm really sad. Let me tell you why I'm sad. And I start thinking about being sad. And I start thinking how it could have been. So I'm just re-triggering it. So I can be sad for a long time. But if I were to not re-trigger it, sadness would actually come and go in a much shorter period of time. But I'll be thinking about it as exposed, in lieu of just experiencing it. But the real negative karmic imprint comes when we act out of anger. So that's the key point here, right? It arises. What do we tend to do? We react. We hit send. We tell somebody off. And then the worst part is we brag about it. Man, I told them. I set them straight, and I feel pretty good about it. Now that is, when we think about karmic imprints, there's the action, but what really magnifies the degree with which that's imprinted in our consciousness is our motivation. Is it anger that motivated it? Well, that's pretty strong. Then I did it. And then there's the component of how do I feel about it? If I feel some regret, that's different than if I feel pretty darn good about it. And that's a complete karmic imprint. So as these things happen, we have to remember life's messy. I've got a lot of delusion. I've got a lot of mental afflictions. I'm just trying to find life's messy. I'm working on getting better. And that's a really good place to come from. And in that space, I need to be gentle with myself. So when I experience anger, to realize that that's okay. It's okay. As a matter of fact, it's progress. Because I'm not the anger. We train some people in our mindfulness courses, and they monitor their thoughts and things. And so some people will put getting angry in an unskillful category. And I'll go, really? What'd you do when you got angry? Did you react? No, I didn't react. Of course not. Well, then put it in the skillful column. Because anger arose and you didn't react. You responded. That's skillful. So that's what we want to be with ourselves. And let's see what he says here. There's another comment. Our Dharma practice really needs to be the antidote for our self-grasping, right? So that's the whole point that we mentioned. Anything that helps us to measure the present level of our self-grasping is to our benefit. And one such measure consists of noting how easily we're insulted. If I'm easily insulted, well, there's a lot of self-grasping. And so that's a really good measure. If somebody says something and I get like, well, don't you know who I am? Well, there's a strong sense of John right here. And not only just John, like who I think John ought to be and how you should treat me. So it's actually a really good measurement to note that. Being easily affronted by others' hostility indicates a strong sense of self-grasping, which surfaces as self-importance and indignation. When a vicious word produces just the slightest flutter, but no contorted fist in our hearts, well, that's a very good sign. So when somebody says something, yeah, I know it, a little twinge. Not a big deal. That's when we're making progress. That's when we're making progress. Because, so, we have all these cool sayings and quotes. Thank God for Facebook, right? A lot of wisdom that pops up on there. And a lot of really good wisdom, actually. And this is a good piece of wisdom, and I think we could mostly, I'm pretty sure, I have found it to be true. You have to test it out. But one thing saying is how someone treats you is a reflection of them, not you, right? So it's kind of a quote, you'll see that. When someone's treating me out of anger or however, right? Well, they're unhappy. And how they're treating me is really a reflection of them and their suffering. Why am I taking it personally? Why am I taking it personally? So I think we can agree that. We can have a nice talk about that and go, yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. And I go out and then you insult me and I go, what a jerk. And I'm upset. Instead of compassionately understanding, wow, they're really suffering. Look at those afflicted states. How much peace do they have? So the idea is that we want to be able to put into practice and remember these pithy little pieces of wisdom and test them out. What if I were to then apply this as a practice and just notice if I feel insulted or indignant today or not? Then this would be one of those practices. I think we probably wouldn't be so boastful. We'd just experience it. And what we would probably experience is that all of those feelings of insecurity, indignation, even joy, some nice compliments we got. If you were to try to not just note every little emotion you had, it would fill pages in a book in one day. Surprise, happiness, indignation, and nervousness, boom. Like, I couldn't, just try to jot those down, every single emotion you had in a day. It would fill pages in 24 hours. We're just not aware of most of them. The only emotions we tend to be really aware of is, they're really strong and prominent. But how many times were you just remotely surprised today or startled today? How many times were you just a bit apprehensive, somewhat nervous? Or maybe optimistic? How many times today? Well, and so what's to note is that all those are just very fleeting emotional mental states responding to phenomena. And they don't last. And I'm not them. But most of the time I don't notice any of that. Because I'm so caught up in myself. Or I'm distracted about what may or may not happen or what I'd like to have happen. That I'm not even aware of the little emotions that are happening in my day. So I don't notice they're fleeting. And then when they're strong, then I am angry. I am sad. I am joyful. And I am that. So you can see how each one of these has just a subtle, if not a very straightforward, always focus on cutting through that root of self-grasping. Starting to notice, I'm not my thoughts, my feelings, I'm not that. They're all temporary. And guess what? I'm not the same John that was sitting here last week. I'm different. So are you. But we carry that as though it's the same being. We forget that we're a stream of consciousness. That river is not the same water. River looks the same. It's not the same water, is it? Stream of consciousness. Two more. We're going to do this. Do not be fickle. That's sound advice. Don't be fickle. Who likes a fickle person? And here, obviously I think most of us should go fickle with our practice. But it's an interesting one. I mean, it does mean that. But the emphasis here is in our relationships with other people. And being fickle is incompatible with the aspiration of entering into the Bodhisattva's way of life. So, how fickle are we with people? Am I a trustworthy friend that will be there for you? Or am I a trustworthy friend that will be here for you as long as you're there for me? Am I a friend who will show up when you need me, or a friend that will show up when it's convenient? Am I a dear friend that will be there and listen to you when you need someone to listen to? Or am I the person who really, they're going to be talking to me for another 20 minutes? Today we have the phone that tells you who's calling. That's so wussy. We used to have to pick up that phone and deal with who was there, right? I mean, there was no caller ID. We pick it up and had to say hello and take the bullet, Nowadays, man, I'm talking about being fickle. Oh, again. We didn't have that before. It rang, and you actually ran to the darn phone, Might miss a call. Now it's like, who the hell is calling, What a mental shift, right? Are we fickle? Are we fickle in some ways? And if we were to describe, here he's emphasizing our relationship with people in our lives. But let's say I were to write down the qualities of the kind of friend I am. I'm dependable. I'm trustworthy. I'm honest. I'm, whatever. And then is that how I actually show up? Any of us have anything that we borrowed from somebody hanging out in our house? What about the mystery books that somebody borrows? Those never come back, do they? But we'll say, yeah, no, I respect your stuff. And that piece of that tool in the tool shed or whatever, yeah, maybe I'll get back to you. I mean, that's just a simple thing. But we're going to find that in general, a lot of the highest qualities that we hold most dear in our own lives, we often don't live up to. And again, it's not to beat ourselves up. It's just to note there's a discrepancy, and I want to close the gap. Just want to close the gap a little bit. Don't be as fickle. Don't be as fickle, and work on that with ourselves and our relationships. If I really see myself as this kind of person, well, do my actions reflect that kind of person most of the time? We're going to be human. We're going to look at that phone and go, okay. We're going to put off, doing things that we feel are actually needed to do out of our own insecurity. So we just want to close the gap there. It says don't be fickle. That's the Bodhisattva warrior path. Let's start with, let's be less fickle. Let's be less fickle. And close that gap. And try to embody those qualities that we find most meaningful in our relationships and who we are and in the path to enlightenment. If my practice is important, then, maybe I do my practice. And I was at this other event last night, and they talked about willingness. You know, how important willingness is. But we need to be willing, right, to do a practice, to change, to do things in life, to be the person we want to be. But there's a big gap between being willing and actually doing something. Even so, the power to actually carry it. I can be willing and not know how to do it. I can become willing and just can't overcome my fears. I can become willing, and there can still be a lot of barriers there. So my thought around that was, and I think it applies here, is that willingness, like any other thing, honesty, any value, if I look at it in terms of a skill to be developed, well, I'll get better at it. In other words, I can be willing to meet with somebody tomorrow at a certain time, and then that time comes, I don't really want to meet with them, or whatever that is, but to do it anyway. To do it anyway. So if I don't feel like doing my practice, and I do it anyway. If I told someone I'd meet them and something comes up, you know, I do it anyway. That it becomes a skill that we develop by practicing. So like any other skill, the trumpet, you know, whatever we want to do. So being less fickle is a skill in that sense. That I'm willing to become the person that I describe myself to be. I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to try. So I'm willing to be uncomfortable. But I have to actually do it then. And then I actually develop a habit of becoming more willing. Because as soon as that tension arises, oh yeah, I know, I just do it. I just do it. Because that's, you know, but it's a practice, like anything. So being less fickle, it's a practice. Being less angry, it's a practice. Not retaliate, it's a practice. And the more that I do these things, then I get better at it, that's all. So if we look at karma in a sense of habits and tendencies, potentials that happen, well, what I do a lot just becomes the way I'm sort of wired. Well, I want to start wiring myself differently, different karmic potentials. So it becomes quite normal for me to, when I feel uncomfortable, to question what's really going on. Instead of retreating, go, okay, maybe I can lean into this a little bit. Becomes a practice. That's why it's always called a practice. Because if we actually practice it, things change. And if I don't, the fascinating thing is things still change. My habits get stronger. They get deeper. My tendencies get more rooted. So it's not that they're not changing. Yeah, they're getting stronger. What I do, think, and say creates potentials to think, do, and say those more frequently. That's all. It's not rocket science. So every time I go against my better judgment or the values or the way that I want to show up in life, well, I'm reinforcing that. And that's the thing around anger. I brought it up many times. But a lot of times it's sort of justifiable anger that I get angry and I tell somebody about it and then you agree with me and then I feel better because I vented and you agreed with me and they're a jerk and everybody knows they're a jerk. And what I really just did was validate my anger. So the next time I'm in a situation like that, what's going to happen? Naturally, I'll get angry and I'll feel like it's okay. So that's one of these very subtle ways we actually create our own suffering. Rather than questioning the anger and not trying to react to it and not validating it, I validate it, I substantiate it, and I get reaffirmed by my friends. And then you all console me. And we can all get pissed off together. Yeah, take somebody's inventory. So what's the old analogy? The water cooler at work. Everybody's hanging out at the water cooler at work. When I was a school teacher, it was the teacher's lounge. Man, those damn kids, they don't want to learn. Just whip it up. And then, what happens is you actually start believing that stuff. Because that's what we think, say, and do. What I think, say, and do becomes my reality. Becomes my experience. So, I talked about the other day, like when we set out water bowls or we do images, the Buddhas don't care about any of this. We're not doing it for them. We're ripening our mind, bringing our mind to virtuous mental states and thinking about, as I'm pouring water, I'm thinking about prostrations and offerings and confession and cultivating virtuous attitudes and generosity. I'm making a nice place that others can enjoy, inviting virtuous states of mind. And that's what I'm doing. So if I'm going home watching TV, last night, was it last night? It was last night, right? I was just tired, did a little exercise, so I was just going to take a time out and watch a little something on Netflix. And I couldn't find anything that wasn't a lot of violence. And not that I'm totally against that or anything, but it was just, I don't know, not even really cool violence. It was, but just like every one of these shows just blowing up and killing things and fighting and this and that. And what happens is, if that's what you watch, that's what's in my mind, right? And as opposed to if I listen to a Dharma talk, well, that's what's in mind. So I shifted and I started watching a little documentary on these nuns that took on the courageous act of leaving their order so they can become fully ordained in another, taking some different vows. It was a big deal to them, and watching their dedication and their effort and stuff. And I had a whole different mental imprint than watching the clip of The Sopranos where Jimmy gets whacked. But we don't really realize that when we're watching that other thing, because it's just another thing. But wow, what a virtuous mental state when I'm watching this other thing, or some. I also glanced at that old documentary on the yogis of Tibet, and start thinking about their efforts. Wow, I feel like a lazy slug, and but in a good way, like there's potential. But so what we're putting in here is critical. And we don't often realize it. What am I putting in my consciousness? I might be worried about the food I eat. I might be worried about my exercise. But none of that's creating my reality. My mind is. What am I putting in my mind? So am I watering the seeds of anger? Am I watering the seeds? Am I, that's the real thing to be on guard of. What am I putting here? I actually have some choice if I'm paying attention. So, be less fickle. And then the last one is also, I find, it says, do not desire gratitude. It says it's self-explanatory. So, how much of what we do in life is transactional? Is it almost everything? I'll do this because I'm expecting that. Why would you show up to work if they're not going to give you a paycheck, right? They stop giving you a paycheck. That's one of the things when I was a school teacher. A lot of people pay kids for good grades, right? And they're saying, well, you don't want to do that because you're losing the intrinsic value of doing well in school, right? You get paid. So you start thinking, well, if you stop paying them, they're going to stop doing the grade, right? Just like a job. So, I don't want to take sides on all that whole philosophy, but things are transactional. So why are we more hurt by a dear friend that we helped a lot in our lifetime when they do us wrong than when a stranger does us wrong? Because we've been keeping score. After all I have done for you, this is how you treat me. Well, I clearly didn't do everything out of just the pure joy of giving and kindness and care for my friend, did I? Well, there's a part of me that's keeping track, keeping score. And then when my loved one does me wrong, it's a big thing. Somebody I could care less about, does me wrong. In a worse way, it's not as big a deal because I don't have that transactional thing. So this idea of, can I actually give without attachment? Can I give just to be giving? Can I help someone for the sheer act of being helpful because they're worth it and they're valuable and I want to be helpful without any expectation of any return? And that's the point we want to get to. We want to eliminate the idea of transactional relationships, because we'll even monitor how much time we spend with a person based on how is that going to help me in my life. I spent X amount of time with so-and-so because I might get this or might get invited to that, or this job might come, or whatever. There's this monitoring, right? We even do that, I bet, at home, you know. A lot of people keep score on chores. Who's always doing the dishes? Who's never picking up this? Why not just pick it up? Is it really hard to vacuum a floor, you know? It can be excruciatingly difficult. Have you ever noticed that? To vacuum a floor can be incredibly tough. Especially, you know, when you're trying to get that one thing, you know, and like it just, come on, really? And it's like, and then finally, I have to bend over and like pick it up. It's just horrible. And then this stupid vacuum, this thing, well, I would say it sucks, but apparently it doesn't. And but it's this whole thing in this moment of vacuuming, and in the big picture, you know, how difficult is any of that? The fact that I could actually bend over and pick something up, you know. And if I didn't have a vacuum, I mean, having to pick up a lot of things, not a big deal, you know. But we keep scoring. We think how things ought to be, and vacuums ought to be like this, and we just create all this mental sufferings in our mind, and just bending over to pick up that darn popcorn kernel can be just frustrating.
Yeah, because they bounce all over.
They do bounce all over. It's horrible. And I don't even know. It's like intolerable, you know. You're talking about the suffering. And worse, you know, I've got one of those vacuums with a little hose thing. I have to like undo it and put the little clip on and do the edge. Man, you want to tie it like 3 or 4 times.
It takes up so much time.
Yeah. God. Man. We have to persevere. We have to persevere. And we laugh now, but, you know, because we can relate. We get worked up over ridiculous things, and it's in our mind. And what if we're just going, like, I have an opportunity to make this place a little cleaner, a little better, you know, why not? Why not? How tough is it? And I get to reap the benefits. Place a little cleaner, dishes are done, you know, I eat off the dishes, whatever. But monitoring, keeping track of the other people I live with, that will create a lot of suffering. Guess what? If you lived alone, you wouldn't be keeping track. Suddenly somebody moves in with you, now I'm keeping score. It's funny. It's really funny. Even if they're only doing 20%, they're doing 20 more than when you were by yourself. Yeah. All mental stuff. So even though it says it doesn't require much explanation, you can see the application of this idea of not expecting, you know. You can see it just creates suffering. It just creates a lot of tension in my mind. Unnecessary. Because who's suffering the whole time? I am. And I carry it with me. So that is the conclusion of the 7 points and the 20 practices of the 7th point. And you know what he says here? This may shock some of you. That completes the 7th point. What do we do next? What do you suspect he says we do next? I'd recommend going back to the beginning of the text and working through it again. For although our memory may be reasonably good, we probably cannot recall everything that came up in the text. Many elements of this training are new threads for the fabric of our lives, for them to become part and natural and spontaneous. we need to go over them slowly again and again. So, that is always a good recommendation. So, if we just think of the 7 points, the first one was first the preliminaries. So preliminaries has these 4 points, which I know everybody knows by heart. The rare and precious human rebirth, impermanence, death, karma, and then the unsatisfactory nature of samsara. Then we go to the second point, which is the main practice, cultivating the 2 bodhicittas, ultimate and relative. And then there's the 6 subpoints of cultivating ultimate bodhicitta, where we, having obtained stability, let the mystery be revealed. And then that's the teaching on what stability is, and seeing all phenomena as illusory. And, so we'd work through all of these points. That's the second point, that's ultimate and relative, giving and taking. And then the third point is transforming adversity to the path. And that's really the oomph of this whole text, is that since we're not monastics and we're not in a setting where we're doing 20 hours of practice a day and around people and that's all we do, most of our life is out in this busy world. Transforming adversity in the path, this third step, is the real source of and focus of this text, which basically says we can transform our life in a Dharma practice. And so it gives the pith tips on how do we transform adversity to the path. Make resentment an opportunity to grow, cultivate patience. How do I engage with others, seeing myself as an illusory being, prone to delusion and projection, and how do I engage in it and carry that in? And how do I transform my difficulties into roots of virtue? And then the fourth point is the synthesis of practice for a single lifetime. And so, we covered those sort of 5 powers, not sort of, those 5 powers in life and then in dying. And then the measure of having practiced, where we're at, the measure of your mind training. And then the precepts and now the practices. So those are the 7 points. And imagine what it'd be like if we knew them, if we embodied them, so that as we engaged in the day, it's like, oh yeah. So really pith instruction is, once we go through it with an overview, well, then we go back and we spend some time. The preliminary practices, I think I've mentioned before, there's an elder monk, I'll call him my elder, when I was a monk and we were traveling. He had been a monk, I don't know, about 18 years maybe at that time, and he'd spent much of his life in retreat. And he was doing his Lamrim meditations. I asked him, so where are you at? He goes, I'm on the preliminaries. He's still on impermanence and death. And he'd spend hours meditating on that. Not that he didn't study and do other things, but that was his he'd still devote all that time, because there's a very difference when you act, as he's explained, when you actually have a realization that today could be your last day, if you actually know that viscerally, it transforms how you engage with your life, as opposed to you and I talking about it. When we meditate on that and notice, intrinsically the impermanent nature of and all the conditions that give rise for us to have life today, and how rare that is, and what that fleeting moment can take. Well, he lived very differently than I did. We went to India together. He had never been to India. We're at this great monastery. I'm running around like a little kid. Well, let's go look at this thing. And he's all in his room meditating. And then say, he'd come out if there was something. Like, well, then I'll come out for that. But I'm like, well, don't you want to go? Yes. No. I'm like, okay. He was the real deal. I was just this little knucklehead monk running around, and got my head shaved, full head thing with a straight razor. It was my big deal for the day. In India, it cost me $1, and it was a hot day, cool little thing. I still remember it. He's meditating on the path to enlightenment. I'm like getting my little straight razor thing, thinking, yeah. So I think I was a little caught up in the 8 worldly concerns, and he was focused. So a very difference in our practice. Very different. Let us dedicate the merit and wisdom that we've accumulated both individually and collectively today and throughout our lifetimes. We dedicate this for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and find lasting happiness. And may we be able to use the merit and the wisdom that we've accumulated here today and throughout our lives to purify our own minds, to cultivate the mind of awakening, to liberate ourselves so we can be of highest benefit for all sentient beings and lead them to liberation. All right, thank you all so much for joining us. Be well, trying to stay out of trouble, and enjoy vacuuming the next time you get a chance. All right, thanks for joining us online. Be well.
Took all the carpet out of my